Welcome to your channel that teaches you corporate English every day.
Imagine you need to build the back end of a web application. You want something that can handle many users at the same time, something fast, something that can respond in real time without waiting too much. That is the type of scenario where Node.js became extremely popular. Node.js is not a language. It is a runtime environment that allows you to run JavaScript outside the browser, usually on a server. The idea behind it is simple. It lets you create back-end logic using a language that was originally designed for the web. Front-end Node.js became popular because it is non-blocking and event-driven. This means it does not stop and wait for slow operations like reading a database or asking an external API instead. It continues running and sends the result back when it is ready. This makes Node.js very good for applications that need to handle thousands of requests per second without crashing or slowing down. When you start learning Node.js at a beginner level, the most important thing is to understand what it actually solves, not the syntax. Many students jump into code without knowing what problem Node solves, and then they end up confused. So let me make it simple. Node.js. It's mainly used when you want to build a server that responds to requests from a browser or other applications. For example, when someone clicks login, create account, view products, send message. The back-end logic that handles these actions could be written in Node, another important concept. Node.js runs on a single thread but uses asynchronous operations to avoid blocking. That is why it can be so efficient. In many traditional backends, if a task is slow, everything waits. In Node, everything continues and slow work finishes in the background. This is why companies that deal with chat, live dashboards, streaming, APIs, and microservices like to use Node when learning Node as a beginner. You must stop thinking like a front-end developer writing tiny pieces of UI logic and start thinking about how data travels. In Node, your mental focus changes from how to show something on screen to how to respond correctly when someone asks the server for information. You begin thinking about routes, requests, responses, and how to send data back in the correct format. Node.js is also known for being lightweight. Instead of frameworks with many rules, Node gives you the freedom to structure things however you want. This is good for flexibility, but it also means beginners can get lost if they do not learn the core concepts first. The core concepts are what a server is, what a request is, what a response is, what HTTP is doing under the surface, and why Node acts like a middle layer between the user and the data. Another thing that makes Node attractive is its huge ecosystem. Because so many developers use it, there are countless tools built on top of Node, but as you requested, I am not going to talk about those now. The goal here is only to understand Node itself as a foundation. Without understanding the fundamentals of Node, none of the tools built on top of it make sense. When thinking about Node.js, think in terms of responsibility. The backend has responsibilities like authentication, storing and reading data, applying business logic, validating input, protecting routes, and managing communication with other systems. Node is the environment where those responsibilities live. It is not about making a button look pretty. It's about deciding what should happen when the button sends a command to the server. Node also changed how teams work. Before Node, many projects used one language for front-end and another for back-end. With Node, teams can unify the stack and use the same base language concept across the application. Again, not the topic here, but it helps you understand why Node was a major shift in the industry. For beginners, the first mental shift is this. You are no longer writing code that runs inside the user's browser. Now you are writing code that lives on a machine elsewhere and waits for people to contact it. That remote machine is the server, and Node gives it the ability to listen and respond. You don't need to know advanced concepts to get started. You only need to be clear about the purpose. If I ask what is Node, the correct beginner answer is not a back-end language or something to build apps. The correct answer is Node is a runtime that allows JavaScript to run on the server to handle requests and responses efficiently. A reason Node is great for beginners is that it teaches you immediately about real-world back-end behavior latency, concurrency, input validation, security, error handling, and performance. These are back-end realities, not academic exercises. Learning Node trains your brain to think like someone building software for real users, not like someone solving school problems. When you start practicing Node after understanding the concepts, the first real task is usually to build a simple server that answers something when accessed. Not because the code is important, but because the exercise teaches the shape of communication between client and server. Every backend begins with that shape. Many beginners make one mistake. They think the hardest part of backend is writing code. It is not. The hardest part is designing logic that makes sense. Node gives you freedom, but freedom without understanding becomes chaos. That is why conceptual clarity comes before syntax. If you know what Node is doing and why, the code will naturally make sense later. You also need to understand the mental model of events. Node applications react to events. A user sent data, a file finished loading, a response arrived, a timer completed. Instead of executing everything line by line, Node reacts to events as they complete. That is why it is called event-driven. This event mindset is the key philosophical difference between Node and traditional blocking systems. Asterisk. When you build a backend with Node, the first thing the server needs is a way to know what someone is asking for. That is what a root represents. It is like a specific door that the user knocks on to request something. If a person wants to see products, they knock on one door. If they want to create an account, they knock on a different door. Each door has a specific purpose. After the server knows which door was knocked on, the second job is to decide how to answer. That answer might be information, a confirmation, an error, or something else. The important part is that Node does not decide randomly. It checks which door was used and then triggers the logic that belongs to that door. Think of a restaurant. The waiter comes to your table not with any random food, but based on what you asked. Roots work the same way. The server listens to the request and responds with the correct thing assigned to that type of request. Inside each root, Node can do 3 categories of work before sending a response. Understanding what the user asked for example. Are they asking for data or sending new information to save? Doing the necessary work behind the scenes that might include checking credentials, reading data, applying rules, or communicating with another service. Sending back a final conclusion, it could be okay. Here is the data, or you are not allowed, or this operation is complete. So the mental model is simple. A root is not code. A root is a rule that connects a specific kind of request to a specific kind of answer. People new to backend sometimes imagine everything as one big ball of logic. Node forces you to think in organized pieces. Each type of request belongs to a dedicated rule set. That is what keeps large systems clean. Even if there are hundreds of roots, each one exists for one clearly defined reason. In summary, a route is a defined entry point for a specific request, and the response is the server's chosen reaction. After finishing whatever must be done, that is the foundation of structure in Node. Once you understand that every backend is a collection of these logical doors and answers, you stop feeling lost. You start designing with intention.